He never barked for help, never chased after cars. He just waited day after day, year after year, beside a forgotten gas station on the edge of Asheville. Through storms, snow, and sweltering heat, he sat in silence, watching the road. Locals called him the guardian who never left. But what they didn't know was that he wasn't lost. He was waiting for the one boy who never stopped believing he'd come back. And what happened after 4 long years will restore your faith in love, and maybe even in God. The sun had barely risen over the quiet hills of Asheville, North Carolina, casting long golden rays through the mist that clung to the Blue Ridge Mountains like a memory that wouldn't quite let go. The streets were still empty at that hour, save for the occasional delivery truck and the flickering neon sign of an old gas station on the outskirts of town. That station hadn't sold fuel in nearly a decade, its paint long chipped and its pumps rusting like abandoned tombstones, but something, or rather someone, had made it home. He sat still as stone near pump number 3, where the overhang had just enough cover to keep the rain off during spring and the snow off in winter. His name was Shadow. He was a large German shepherd, likely around 6 years old now, his once proud sable coat faded to dusty tones from years of weathering. His eyes, a piercing amber, watched the road with such unwavering focus that some locals swore he could see through the fog of time itself. His ears were always perked, alert not to danger but to the sound of a familiar engine, a familiar voice, a promise kept or broken. Shadow wasn't aggressive. In fact, no one had ever heard him bark. When people approached, he would simply stand, walk a few feet away, and sit again, eyes still trained on the same stretch of Highway 40 that cut through the mountain valley like an old scar. A few good Samaritans had tried to leash him, to coax him into their cars, or to bring him into town, but Shadow would only run, circle back, and return to the same spot like a compass needle drawn to true north. It was as though something, or someone, had tethered him to that patch of cracked pavement with something stronger than rope or chain, memory. Across town, in a 2-story brick building nestled between a pharmacy and a second-hand bookstore, the smell of cinnamon rolls and strong coffee wafted from a narrow cafe called the Hollow Cup. Its owner, Laura Jenkins, was the kind of woman who moved through life with quiet strength. At 58, Laura had silver-streaked auburn hair always pulled back in a low bun, deep lines etched around her gray eyes from years of sun, sorrow, and laughter in equal parts. She was tall and lean, always wearing thick wool cardigans no matter the season, and her fingers bore the soft calluses of someone who needed bread and hearts in equal measure. Ever since losing her husband Harold to cancer 5 years ago, Laura had filled her days with early mornings, old recipes, and a kind of watchfulness that came from living alone but not feeling lonely. Laura had first seen Shadow during one of her pre-dawn deliveries. Every morning, just before 5 a.m., she drove her battered blue pickup to the local bakery to collect pastries, passing the old gas station on her way. One winter morning nearly 4 years ago, she noticed a silhouette against the snow-covered concrete, a dog perfectly still, as if carved from stone. At first, she thought he'd been abandoned recently, but then he was still there the next week, and the week after. Eventually, Laura started leaving food and water under the fuel pump canopy, a plastic bowl tucked behind a concrete pillar. She never approached too closely, and Shadow never came while she was watching. But every morning, the bowl was empty and the food gone. So she began recording her visits in a small notebook kept in her glove compartment, jotting down notes like "still here, cloudy morning," or "barked once at a bird," even though she knew it wasn't for anyone but herself. One particularly damp morning in late March, the town was still groggy from a night of thunderstorms. Tree branches sagged with rainwater, and the mountain mist clung lower than usual, curling through alleyways and across lawns like breath. Lara's truck pulled to a stop just across from the station, its tires crunching wet gravel. She stepped out, cardigan pulled tight, and walked slowly to her usual drop spot. Shadow was there as always. This time he was lying down, his body curled with his snout resting over his front paws. His eyes, however, remained open, alert, but tired. Laura crouched down on the other side of the pump, and gently set the container of chicken broth and brown rice in its usual spot. She spoke softly, not expecting a reply. "Morning, handsome. Still holding out for someone, aren't you?" Shadow didn't flinch, but his ears twitched. Lara stayed a few moments longer than usual that day. She sat on the curb across the lot, her arms wrapped around her knees, sipping from a thermos. The clouds overhead were beginning to break apart, thin beams of sunlight filtering down in hopeful streaks. The dog across from her remained still, a sentinel against time, grief, and the cruelty of forgetfulness. Back at her cafe, Lara shared bits and pieces of Shadow's story with her customers, mostly locals who already knew or had seen him. They referred to him as that highway ghost, or the statue dog, but Lara always corrected them gently. "His name is Shadow. He's not lost. He's waiting." Some customers nodded. Others scoffed. A few said someone should just take him in already. But Lara never pushed. She believed in letting things unfold naturally, in patience born from pain. She had waited for Harold to recover for 3 years before accepting his diagnosis wouldn't change. Some things, she knew, could not be forced. Not healing, not grief, and certainly not a loyal heart waiting by the road. By early April, a few online pet forums had begun circulating blurry photos of Shadow, taken by truckers and travelers who had noticed him on repeat visits. Posts titled, "This dog's been here every time I drive through Asheville," or "Highway 40's loyal pup," began gathering sympathy and intrigue, but no one knew the full story. No collar, no chip, no tags. Just a pair of eyes that had seen too much and still refused to look away. It wasn't until one rainy Tuesday evening, when an out-of-town journalist named Tyler Grant passed through Asheville on assignment, that Shadow's quiet vigil began to stir the winds of change. But that moment, like so many others, was still waiting on the horizon. For now, Shadow remained where he had always been, a lone figure beneath the rusted canopy of an old gas station. His fur matted in places, but his eyes still clear. A dog with no home, yet somehow still anchored to one. And in the distance, the road stretched endlessly into mist, as if carrying the weight of 1,000 promises yet to be fulfilled. The wind swept over the Appalachian hills like a whisper from the past, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and the first budding hints of spring. Asheville remained quiet under a pale morning sky, clouds brushing low across the rooftops like hesitant hands afraid to linger. At the edge of town, where the road curved just enough to be forgotten, Shadow lay curled in his usual place beside the cracked pump of the old gas station, unmoving except for the slow rise and fall of his chest. But in the stillness of his body there lived an unrest, a flicker of memory just beneath the surface, waiting for breath and time to rise. For years earlier, the world had smelled different. Warmer, richer. Back then, Shadow had been smaller, just over a year old, his coat vibrant with deep sable and bright bronze edges. His ears perked with every new sound, his body always in motion unless curled at the feet of a boy named Ethan Williams. Ethan was 9 then, a lanky child with wild sun-bleached hair and a habit of asking questions faster than anyone could answer them. His eyes, a soft shade of green that changed with the light, held a constant spark of curiosity. He loved maps, comic books, and grilled cheese sandwiches cut into triangles. But more than anything, he loved Shadow. They had grown up together, Shadow from pup to protector, and Ethan from dreamer to daring explorer of suburban woods. The Williams family lived in Marietta, Georgia, in a modest blue house with white shutters and a squeaky screen door. Ethan's mother, Rachel, was a high school biology teacher with gentle freckles and tired but kind hazel eyes, always pulled into a bun too hastily to stay neat. His father, Daniel, a mechanic with calloused hands and a dry wit, was quieter but loyal, the type of man who said little but never missed dinner. Their last trip as a family had been to visit Ethan's grandmother in Asheville. It was meant to be a simple weekend drive, long, but filled with music, snack wrappers, and Shadow's head poking between the seats every time someone opened a granola bar. The weather had turned faster than expected. Rain began falling in thick sheets just outside Cherokee. Fog rolled in soon after, dense and sudden. The The highway twisted through the mountain curves, slick and narrow, until headlights appeared around a bend, too fast, too close. The crash wasn't a scream, but a thundering crack of metal, glass, and momentum. The car spun twice before slamming into a guardrail and flipping down the embankment. Inside, Ethan screamed, and then everything went black. Shadow remembered waking to the cold bite of rain and the acrid smell of oil. His head throbbed. The world tilted and reeled. There were voices, distant, panicked. Someone lifted Ethan from the wreck. Paramedics? Strangers? Shadow barked, tried to reach him, but arms grabbed him, held him. Instinct surged. He twisted free, blood on his muzzle from a shattered window, and ran. He didn't know where. He only knew he had to find Ethan. That night, he wandered the forest edges, limping, confused, his senses overwhelmed. The scent trail was there, faint, tangled with gasoline and wet leaves. Eventually, it led him toward the road, toward the gas station. The place was empty, quiet, but close to where the trail had gone cold. Shadow stopped there, unsure what else to do. And he waited. Back in Marietta, the news came in fragments. Rachel had broken both her arms and suffered a concussion. Daniel was hospitalized for internal injuries. Ethan had been in critical condition for 3 days. No one knew what happened to the dog. When a rescue team combed the crash site, there was no sign of Shadow. The vet hospital was never called. Rachel whispered once in her haze of pain, "Did the dog get out?" But no one had an answer. After Ethan's slow recovery, the family found themselves unraveling in pieces. Daniel began having nightmares. Rachel withdrew into work, her eyes more tired than ever. Ethan, still limping from a fractured femur, rarely spoke about the accident. He asked once, quietly, if Shadow was dead. No one could say yes. But no one said no either. It was James Williams, Ethan's grandfather, who made the final call. A retired Marine with a square jaw and sun-leathered skin, James had served 2 tours in Vietnam and another in Iraq as a logistics officer. He was not a man who indulged in speculation. At 72, his knees ached and his patience was short, but his love for family ran deeper than blood. After weeks of tension, James packed the family into his old Chevy Suburban and moved them to his ranch outside San Antonio, Texas. "Fresh air and space," he said. "It's time for new ground." James was never one to speak in metaphors, but he knew loss when he saw it. He had buried friends in foreign lands and watched strong men break under quiet grief. He recognized that same weight in his daughter's silence, in Daniel's hollow stare, and in Ethan's stiff movements around the empty dog bed. They needed distance, even if it hurt. In Texas, life moved on, but never fully forward. The house was bigger, the skies wider, and Ethan started school again. But some nights, he would sit by the window for hours, staring into the yard as if expecting a blur of black and tan to come bounding through the mesquite trees. James noticed. He began rising early to walk the perimeter of the property, half hoping to see a shadow that never came. One morning, he handed Ethan a pocket knife and said, "For your next adventure." Ethan nodded but didn't smile. And back in Asheville, under the quiet hush of falling leaves and changing seasons, Shadow waited. He did not chase cars. He did not bark at strangers. But he watched every face that passed. Some nights, when the wind shifted just right, he would raise his nose and sniff at the air, then settle again, heart slow but not stilled. What no one knew was that Ethan had never stopped looking either. Not truly. He had drawn Shadow's face from memory a dozen times in his notebooks. He'd left out a dog bowl by the porch until his mother quietly put it away. And he had never deleted the last photo they'd taken together, Shadow's tongue lolling happily, his ears lopsided, tail a blur. They had both changed, but neither had moved on. And far away, under a gray North Carolina sky, a photographer's shutter would soon click. A new thread would form, and the distance between memory and reunion would begin to close. The rain had just begun to fall as Tyler Grant pulled his old Jeep Cherokee off the Blue Ridge Parkway and onto the narrow shoulder of Route 40. The wipers smeared arcs of drizzle across the windshield, but he barely noticed. His mind was numb, his body weary, the dashboard cluttered with crumpled takeout bags and dog-eared notebooks. He was passing through Asheville on assignment, though calling it that felt generous. It had been 6 months since he'd taken on anything truly meaningful. These days, his freelance work was mostly filler stories, small-town festivals, local elections, human interest fluff with no teeth. Still, it paid just enough to keep him drifting from town to town, motel to motel, like a man too rootless to stop and too tired to keep going. Tyler was in his mid-30s, but carried the fatigue of someone older. He had close-cropped black hair streaked faintly with gray, a square jaw softened by a few days' stubble, and sharp green eyes that had once scanned battlefields in Kabul and Aleppo. He stood just over 6 feet, broad-shouldered but slightly hunched as if he were always bracing for something. A thin scar stretched from the bridge of his nose to his left cheekbone, a souvenir from a mortar blast in Mosul. Since returning from his last foreign assignment 3 years ago, he had been different, quieter, slower to trust, quicker to leave. The headlines had gotten louder, but inside, Tyler had gone silent. That morning, something had pulled him off the road. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the stillness, how the landscape, just outside town, seemed to pause in reverence beneath the gray sky. He spotted the gas station first, rusted, abandoned, the kind of place long since forgotten by GPS or modern need. And there, under the bent metal awning, was the dog. Even from a distance, the sight was strange. Not because the dog looked dangerous, he didn't, but because he looked so deliberate. As if he weren't resting, but watching. The German shepherd sat upright, alert but calm, his thick coat dulled by time and exposure. Rain slid off the canopy in slow rivulets as the dog's gaze followed the empty road like a soldier on post. Tyler pulled over, grabbed his camera from the back seat, and stepped out. The cold hit him first, late March wind that smelled of wet bark and worn asphalt. He took a few cautious steps toward the gas station, raising his lens halfway. The dog didn't bark, didn't move, just stared ahead. A figure emerged from across the road, waving slightly. Tyler lowered his camera as the woman approached. She wore a long burgundy coat and mismatched gloves. Her name, as he would soon learn, was Margaret Tate, 62 years old, a retired librarian who volunteered at the local animal shelter. Her silver hair was braided down one side, and her speech carried the slow, careful cadence of someone who had once read aloud for a living. "You won't get much from him," she said, nodding toward the dog. "He doesn't bark. Doesn't leave either. Been sitting right there for years." Tyler blinked. Years? For maybe more. Some say he's a ghost. Others think he's waiting for someone. I like to believe he's just stubborn. That was the first time Tyler heard the name locals had given him, Shadow. Something about it stuck. Tyler took a few photographs, careful not to get too close, and thanked Margaret before heading back to his Jeep. But he didn't leave town. Not yet. Something about the image had settled deep in his gut, just beneath the place where stories used to live. That night, in his motel room with its humming heater and bleach-scented sheets, Tyler opened his laptop. He sifted through local news archives, police reports, veterinary records, shelter intakes. Nothing conclusive. No matching microchip data. No reported sightings of a missing German shepherd in the Asheville area. Just silence. The next day, he returned to the gas station, arriving just after dawn. The dog was there, of course he was. Tyler set up his tripod on the opposite side of the lot, filming in long, steady shots. He spoke softly into the mic, narrating details: coat condition, posture, eye movement. The camera caught the quiet nobility in the animal's stance, the weight of time in his gaze. He was no longer just a stray. He was a monument. Tyler's footage began forming a narrative in his mind, not just about the dog, but about why he stayed. And why he, a man who hadn't written anything that mattered in years, suddenly couldn't stop typing. In the evenings, Tyler interviewed townsfolk, baristas, truckers, and an elderly couple who ran a bait shop down the road. One of them, Frank Barlow, a grizzled Vietnam vet with a limp and a voice like sandpaper, said he once saw the dog sprint after an ambulance on that same stretch of road. "Must have been 2-3 years back. I was fueling my truck. Dog chased that siren like he knew it. The thread pulled tighter. On the third day, Tyler visited the Hollow Cup, the cafe run by Laura Jenkins, whom he'd heard about from Margaret. Laura, with her storm-colored eyes and slow smile, recognized the spark in Tyler's voice before he even said the dog's name. "Shadow," she said, placing a cup of black coffee in front of him. "I've been feeding him for years." Tyler leaned forward. "Do you remember when he first showed up?" Laura thought for a moment, wiping her hands on a flour-dusted apron. "It was after that big storm 4 years ago. The one that flooded the West Bridge. A couple days later, he was just there, looking like he'd been hit by a memory." Tyler nodded, recording notes. "Do you think he's waiting for someone?" "I know he is." That night, Tyler drafted his article's opening lines. "He waits by a forgotten road in a forgotten town, unmoved by wind or rain. Some say he's a ghost, others a fool. But what if he's a memory waiting to be remembered?" He wasn't ready to publish. Not yet. But the story was unfolding faster now, like fog lifting from a familiar path. That same evening, in the warm yellow light of his motel room, Tyler stared at a photo from Mosul. It was the last one he'd taken before his convoy was bombed. A boy holding a dog, both covered in dust, both alive against all odds. Tyler remembered thinking, back then, that sometimes survival was the story. He'd survived, but he hadn't really lived since. Now, in a small town, a silent dog on a roadside had reminded him why he once chased stories with his whole heart. And that changed everything. By the end of the week, Tyler Grant had taken to waking before the sun and returning to the same stretch of asphalt just off Route 40, where Shadow sat like a statue beneath the rusted roof of the gas station. Each day brought new light and colder wind, but the dog's position never changed. In a town like Asheville, where nature whispered through every tree and silence held its own rhythm, Shadow had become more than a presence. He was a fixture, a kind of myth with a heartbeat. Tyler's investigation, once a quiet curiosity, was now a full pursuit. He filled pages of his notebook with quotes, names, sightings. The more he learned, the more he realized that this wasn't a case of a forgotten stray. It was a series of near reunions that had almost happened but never quite made it. The first lead came from Joe Clancy, a long-haul trucker in his 50s with a thick salt and pepper beard and deep lines etched across his wind-reddened face. Joe stopped in at the Hollow Cup one morning and noticed Tyler's camera bag slung over a chair. He grunted, slid onto the stool beside him, and nodded at the photos on Tyler's laptop screen. "You're looking into the gas station, dog," Joe said. His voice was gravelly, coated with years of diesel fumes and late-night highway coffee. "I tried to take him once." Tyler turned to him, eyebrows raised. "When?" "2 years ago. Winter. Temperature dropped below 10. I pulled in to rest and saw him just sitting there, covered in snow like a stone angel. I left my truck door open, figured maybe he'd jump in if he got cold enough. I even laid out jerky on the passenger seat. But he just looked at me, like he was waiting for permission that never came." Joe's story echoed what Tyler had begun to piece together. Shadow didn't run from people, but he didn't go with them either. It was as if something invisible bound him to that place, something that couldn't be undone by food, warmth, or kindness alone. A few days later, Tyler followed a tip to the Holbrook family, who had vacationed in Asheville the previous spring. They were a young couple, Mark and Clarissa, both in their early 30s, who now lived in Nashville. Clarissa was petite, with short auburn curls and a constant look of thoughtful curiosity. Mark was tall, slightly awkward in posture, a schoolteacher with a soft spot for stray animals. They agreed to a video call. "We saw him near the gas station," Clarissa said. "He looked tired but alert. Our daughter, Ellie, wanted to pet him so badly." Tyler asked what happened. "He let her get close," Mark added, "which surprised us. But the moment I pulled out a leash, he backed away. Walked across the lot and just sat again, like a reset button." Clarissa shook her head. "It was like he wasn't really lost. Just stationed, like a sentry." More stories poured in. A local UPS driver, Sheldon Price, mentioned he saw Shadow every Tuesday morning for his delivery route. He's like the post office. Rain, shine, snow, doesn't matter. Always there, he laughed. One time I left my door open, and he hopped in. Thought I had him. But when I started the engine, he jumped right back out. Wouldn't go more than a few feet from the station. The most haunting account came from Laura Jenkins herself. It was one of the rare occasions she invited Tyler to sit in the back of the cafe, away from the bustle and clinking mugs. The sun was setting, casting orange light across the worn wood floors. "It was 2 winters ago," she began, her voice softer than usual. "A blizzard rolled in, worst one we'd had in a decade. Roads closed. Town shut down. I couldn't sleep knowing he was out there." Tyler leaned forward. "Did you try to bring him in?" "I drove as close as I could, then hiked the last half-mile. Nearly slipped a dozen times. When I got there, he was lying in the snow, curled so tight I thought he was dead." She paused, her hands trembling slightly. "But he lifted his head, looked at me. I had a thick wool blanket, a leash, warm chicken in a thermos. I sat with him for hours. He never moved, just kept watching the road." "What did you do?" Tyler asked. "I cried," Laura whispered. "Then I left the food and went home." That night, the town had lost power. Laura had lit candles and watched the snow fall from her window, wondering if Shadow had survived. In the morning, she drove back. He was still there, blanket covered in snow, bowl licked clean. But his eyes remained fixed forward, waiting. It was after that storm the townspeople began calling him the Watcher. Not out of fear, but reverence. Children whispered stories that he was a guardian spirit. Teenagers dared each other to walk past him at midnight. Older folks left treats beside the road like offerings. Some believed he was waiting for a soldier who'd never come home. Others thought he was cursed. But no one doubted that something tied him to that patch of land. Tyler's article began to take shape, but it wasn't ready. It needed more. A truth beyond folklore. That night, as he sat in his motel room staring at the blinking cursor on his laptop, he rewatched every clip he'd taken. In one, Shadow lifted his head at the sound of a truck downshifting in the distance. His ears perked, then slowly lowered again. The disappointment was subtle but heartbreaking. Tyler stared into the screen. "Who are you waiting for?" he whispered. And then he made a decision. He would find out, not just what had happened, but who had been lost. Who had once held this dog's leash, whose name still echoed in the silence between each passing car. The rain returned in thin, icy threads as dusk settled over Asheville. The kind that didn't soak you so much as cling to your skin like a reminder that winter hadn't truly left. Tyler Grant sat in the corner booth of the Hollow Cup, his laptop open and a dozen open browser tabs glaring back at him. Cold coffee sat untouched beside a cinnamon scone he had forgotten to eat. He rubbed his temples, his eyes red-rimmed from hours of reading records, intake forms, digital archives. And then finally he found it. It was buried in a county database under lost pet notices from 4 years ago. The form was hastily scanned, slightly faded but still legible. The date was March 19th. The dog listed, male German Shepherd, approximate 18 months, sable coat, name, Shadow. Owner, Ethan Williams. The note said lost near Route 40, last seen at crash site. Tyler stared at the screen, frozen. Ethan Williams. The name was unfamiliar. He copied it down, heart pounding. Attached to the report was a brief summary. Family involved in car accident near Asheville. Dog missing after impact. Believed dead. No follow-up. No confirmation. Just that one report, left to rot in digital silence. He printed it and tucked it carefully into a folder beside his camera. The noise of the cafe returned slowly to his awareness, the clinking of mugs, the low hum of conversation. Laura Jenkins approached the table, drying her hands on a towel tucked into her apron. "You've been here all day," she said gently. Tyler looked up, blinking. "I found something." Her expression didn't change, but her posture leaned forward, attentive. "About the dog?" He nodded and handed her the printout. She scanned it, her mouth tightening. "Ethan Williams. You think that's his boy?" "I don't think," Tyler said. "I'm sure of it." The next morning, Tyler began making calls. He started with the county animal shelter, but their records were incomplete. He reached out to veterinary clinics near the crash site, but no one had any trace of Shadow ever being brought in. It was only when he spoke to a retired paramedic named Paul Alvarez, now living in Waynesville, that the pieces began to align. Paul was 67, a compact man with sun-spotted skin, a thick Appalachian accent, and a sharp memory honed by years of adrenaline-fueled nights. Tyler reached him through a referral from the fire department, and the man was surprisingly willing to talk. "I remember that wreck," Paul said over the phone. "It was bad. Rained like hell that night. Family flipped their car down an embankment off Route 40. Took us a while to get down there. Do you remember a dog?" Tyler asked. A pause. "Yeah," Paul said slowly. "Big shepherd. Real shaken. Wasn't hurt, but spooked. When we started pulling the boy out, Ethan, I think his name was, the dog started barking like crazy. Wouldn't let us near at first." Tyler's chest tightened. "What happened?" "We got the kid stabilized. Dog tried to follow the stretcher. Someone grabbed him to get him out of the way. That was the last I saw. One of the other responders said the dog broke free and ran off. We searched, but it was dark and messy. Honestly, we figured he didn't make it." Tyler's voice cracked. "He did. He's still here. At that old gas station, just off the highway." There was a silence on the line. Then Paul said, "You're telling me that dog's been waiting there for 4 years?" "Yes." Another pause. "You get him home. That dog's earned it." After hanging up, Tyler sat in his motel room for a long while, staring at his hands. The realization that Shadow had watched his boy being carried away, that he had tried to follow, tried to stay close, and then lost him completely, settled over Tyler like the weight of wet earth. All those years, Shadow hadn't just been waiting. He'd been loyal in the most human way possible, refusing to move on when love had not yet returned. Wanting to be thorough, Tyler drove out to the crash site just after noon. The spot was unremarkable now, just a patch of trees where the guardrail had been repaired. But 20 yards up the road was the old gas station. It made perfect sense. Shadow hadn't wandered randomly. He had chosen that spot. It was the closest place to the accident site where he could see the road. Back at the cafe, Laura introduced Tyler to a man who had once worked at that same gas station before it closed. Charlie Benton, a lanky man in his 70s with shaggy gray eyebrows and a tendency to drift mid-sentence, had lived in Asheville his whole life. His voice rasped from decades of pipe smoking, but his memory was surprisingly sharp. "That dog," Charlie said, squinting. "He showed up a couple days after the accident. I remember because I found paw prints near the edge of the lot, muddy, like he'd been circling the place." Tyler leaned in. "Did he leave?" "No, sir. I tried to feed him, but he wouldn't come close. Just sat there. Every day. Rain or sun. Once, I saw him run after a fire truck. Thought maybe he thought it was his people." Tyler scribbled notes furiously. "He chased sirens?" "Sometimes," Charlie said, "but only the ones coming from that direction." He pointed down Route 40 toward the crash site. Always sat back down after. Just waited. That night, Tyler compiled all his footage into a short video. He kept it raw, no music, no editing tricks. Just Shadow sitting waiting. The voiceover was quiet, solemn. "He has waited here, every day, for 4 years. He doesn't run. He doesn't beg. He just watches the road, holding on to a promise only he remembers. His name is Shadow, and I think it's time he found his way home." He uploaded the video to Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter with the caption, "Does anyone recognize this dog? For years. Same spot. Same eyes. Help us bring him home." He didn't sleep that night, and by morning, the world had seen it. By the time the sun rose over Asheville, the sky awash in pale amber streaks and soft lavender clouds, Tyler Grant's video had already surpassed 40,000 views. He hadn't expected it to move so fast. Just after midnight, he posted it with the simple caption, "The dog who waited, for years at the roadside." By 3 a.m., major animal advocacy pages had reposted it. By 6 a.m., It had made its way onto regional news outlets. And by 9 a.m., a national morning show had reached out asking for an interview. But Tyler wasn't reading emails. He was back at the gas station, watching Shadow as he did every day now. The dog was lying down this morning, head resting on his front paws, though his ears still flicked toward every passing car. The wind swept gently through the thin trees lining the highway, carrying the faint scent of damp pine and motor oil. Laura Jenkins arrived just before 10 o'clock, carrying 2 travel mugs of coffee and a brown paper bag with cinnamon rolls. Her cardigan today was navy blue with tiny embroidered stars along the cuffs, and she had pinned her silver-streaked hair back with a brass clip in the shape of a leaf. "Your dog broke the internet," she said, handing Tyler his cup. He took it with a tired smile. "He's not my dog." She gave him a knowing glance. "That's not what the comments section thinks." Tyler opened his phone reluctantly and checked the latest count. 78,000 views, 4,300 shares, and over 1,000 comments. Some were simple heartbreak emojis. Others shared personal stories of lost pets, stories of hope, loss, and improbable reunions. But one comment, just one, was pinned to the top of the thread. It was written by someone named Carla Williams. "I think this is my grandson's dog. We lost him 4 years ago in a crash near Asheville. His name is Shadow. Please, someone tell me this is real." Tyler's pulse quickened. He clicked into Carla's profile, finding a public photo of a woman in her late 60s. Her face was soft and kind, with warm brown eyes and silver curls pinned neatly back. She stood beside a teenage boy with sandy hair and a solemn smile, both of them holding a framed photo of a German Shepherd puppy. Tyler typed a message. "Hi Carla. My name is Tyler Grant. I'm the journalist who posted the video. I think we need to talk." She responded less than 10 minutes later. "Can I call you?" Moments later, his phone rang. Her voice was trembling with emotion. "Please, is he really there? Is it Shadow?" Tyler stood, walking a few steps away from the gas station. He turned his back to the road and faced the trees, his hand gripping the phone tighter. "Yes, ma'am. He's here. He never left." There was a choked sob on the other end. "I can't believe it. We thought he was gone. My daughter and her husband, they never stopped mourning. But we moved away. We thought if he was alive, he'd have found us. But I guess he stayed where he last saw Ethan." "Your grandson?" Tyler asked gently. "Yes. Ethan's 15 now. He was only 9 when we lost Shadow. They grew up together, inseparable. After the accident, we moved to Texas. My husband insisted we needed space. But Ethan, he always believed Shadow survived. I just never imagined, for years." Tyler's voice was quiet. "Would you like to come get him?" "We'll leave tonight," she said. "Just tell him we're coming." Tyler hung up and turned to look at Shadow. The dog was still lying in his usual spot, but now his ears were perked, and his head tilted just slightly in Tyler's direction, as if sensing the shift. That afternoon, as word spread about the possible reunion, people began arriving. Locals stopped by the gas station in slow trickles, some bringing treats, others just standing quietly at a distance, whispering stories. A woman named Nancy Blake, a retired schoolteacher with a purple coat and a soft demeanor, brought a crocheted blanket with Shadow's name stitched into the corner. "My granddaughter made it," she explained. "She's never met the dog, but she said, he deserves something warm." A young couple, Jamie and Russell Tibbetts, brought a framed sketch their son had drawn of Shadow. The boy, only 6, had seen the video and insisted on making a welcome home card for the dog. The image was crude but heartfelt, a scribbled brown dog sitting beside a road with a sun above and the words, "You're a hero," in crayon. As the crowd grew, Laura stepped in to help. She organized the snacks and drinks, brought out folding chairs, and gently asked those who approached too closely to give Shadow space. "He's waited a long time," she told them softly. "Let's not rush him now." Tyler watched it all from behind his camera, recording everything. The community gathering, the quiet reverence, the ripple of one loyal dog's story spreading far beyond what anyone could have expected. And all the while, Shadow stayed calm, occasionally lifting his head or twitching his ears, but never straying from his post. That evening, Tyler received a video from Carla. In it, Ethan was sitting on the edge of his bed, holding a photo of Shadow. His voice was shaky but firm. "Hey, Shadow. If you can hear me, we're coming, okay? I never stopped thinking about you. I knew you'd wait. You always waited. You're the best boy. Just hang on a little longer." Tyler showed the clip to Laura. For the first time since he'd met her, her eyes welled with tears. "That's the kind of love you don't see in this world much anymore," she whispered. As night fell, the town quieted again. Most people had gone home, but a few stayed behind, camping in their cars nearby, bringing flashlights, candles, and soft music. It wasn't a vigil, not exactly, but it felt sacred. Tyler sat by his vehicle, wrapped in a blanket someone had offered, typing the next piece of his story by the glow of his laptop. He knew now that he wasn't just documenting Shadow's loyalty. He was chronicling a return, not just of a dog to his boy, but of hope to a town, of purpose to a journalist, and of faith to those who had long stopped believing in miracles. Tomorrow, Carla and Ethan would arrive, and nothing would ever be the same again. Night swallowed the sky over San Antonio, Texas, in a quiet hush as Carla Williams double-checked the zipper on her travel duffel. She had packed extra dog food, a thick fleece blanket, and a small cooler filled with sandwiches and coffee. Her silver curls were pinned back tighter than usual, and a tremor of anticipation hummed through her hands as she zipped up her coat. At 69, she had the careful steadiness of someone who had raised 3 children, survived breast cancer, and watched grief stretch families thin. But she also carried an enduring softness that had kept her grandson from ever drifting too far. Ethan Williams, now 13, stood by the front door, clutching a worn red leash in one hand and an old photograph in the other. The picture showed a younger version of himself, only 8 or 9, smiling wide with 2 missing teeth, his arms wrapped around a sable-furred puppy with giant ears and paws too big for his frame. Shadow. Even then, the dog's eyes had carried a weight Ethan had never been able to explain, like he'd seen farther down the road than any of them. Ethan had grown taller since then, though his build remained wiry and lean. His hair, once light brown, had darkened into sandy chestnut waves that always fell into his eyes, no matter how often he pushed them back. He didn't speak much, not anymore. After the accident, something inside him had settled into stillness, like an engine put into idle. But when he saw the video Tyler had posted, when he saw Shadow, a light returned to him that Carla hadn't seen in years. "Are you ready, sweetheart?" she asked, voice low. Ethan nodded once. "I've always been ready." They left just after 10 p.m., the highway empty and the air sharp. Carla's husband had insisted they take the larger SUV for the drive, worried the old sedan wouldn't handle the mountain roads. The car was clean and quiet, its headlights slicing through the dark like lanterns carried across an endless field. It was a 10-hour drive from San Antonio to Asheville. Carla did most of the driving through the night, humming softly to herself, glancing at Ethan through the mirror when he fell asleep. In the dim cabin light, she saw him curled against the window, still holding the photo like a lifeline. She whispered a quiet prayer, not knowing to whom, only that someone must have been watching over Shadow all these years. Meanwhile, in Asheville, dawn was creeping across the town like a slow inhale. The gas station, usually desolate and still, had become something of a gathering point. Word had spread quickly through social media and local radio. A small chalkboard sign had been set up at the edge of the road, "Shadow's Homecoming." Beneath it, someone had written in loopy cursive, "Please be quiet and respectful, he's still watching the road." A group of residents had gathered nearby with folding chairs and picnic blankets. Among them was Donnie Clark, a retired park ranger with a belly shaped like a barrel and a heart just as big. Donnie had short white hair, faded green eyes, and an ever-present ball cap with a patch from Great Smoky Mountains National Park. He'd seen Shadow for years, and used to leave pieces of jerky from his lunch pack when patrolling nearby trails. "I told my wife if that dog ever leaves, I'll hang up my boots for good," he joked to the group. Beside him sat B. Richardson, a shy high school sophomore with braces and thick glasses, who'd drawn a series of watercolor paintings of Shadow and set them on a makeshift easel near the curb. "He's like a story that stayed," she murmured to Tyler, who had returned that morning to document whatever might unfold. Tyler, camera slung over one shoulder, moved among the crowd with quiet purpose. He had barely slept, alternating between checking updates on Carla's route and speaking softly to news crews who had begun arriving with microphones and fuzzy boom mics. But he kept his distance from Shadow, who remained exactly where he always had, near pump 3, back straight, tail curled gently around his paws, eyes scanning the road with a patience that had long since become legend. Laura Jenkins arrived around 7 a.m., carrying 2 thermoses and a basket of blueberry scones. Her eyes, usually bright with mischief, were heavy with emotion today. She handed Tyler a cup without a word and set the rest near a card that read, "For Shadow's people when they arrive." And then around 8 a.m., the black SUV turned off the main road and slowed to a crawl. It rolled past the chalkboard sign and came to a full stop near the edge of the lot. No one spoke. Tyler lowered his camera slightly. People stood in place, breath held. It was as if the entire town had been holding its heartbeat for this very moment. Carla stepped out first, eyes blinking against the soft light, her hands trembling slightly. She walked to the passenger side and opened the door. Ethan stepped out slowly, the leash looped in his hand, the photo still tucked under his arm. His eyes scanned the lot, past the strangers, past the cameras, and locked onto the single form sitting silently under the awning. Shadow didn't move at first. He just stared. Then his ears flicked. His head tilted. Ethan took a step forward, voice breaking the stillness. "Shadow." The dog stood. Tyler had never seen anything like it. The change was instant. One heartbeat, Shadow was a statue. The next, he was in motion, ears pinned back, legs moving, tail rising with cautious speed. Ethan knelt down on the gravel, the leash falling to the ground. "It's me, buddy. It's Ethan." Shadow paused 5 feet away. His nose twitched. He looked not just at the boy, but through him, as if matching scent to memory, posture to presence. And then, with a choked whimper, he rushed forward. The sound that came from Ethan as Shadow collided into him, tail wagging, whining, licking every inch of his face, was something between a laugh and a sob. The crowd stayed silent, reverent, as the boy and the dog curled into each other on the ground like time had finally given in and allowed what it had stolen to be returned. Carla stood beside them, tears spilling down her cheeks, her hand pressed over her mouth. Tyler lowered the camera and wiped his own eyes. No one needed a lens for this. It would live in memory, sharper than any photo. When the embrace finally broke, Ethan clipped the leash gently onto Shadow's collar. Shadow didn't resist. He simply pressed his body closer, as if to say, "I'm ready now." "You're here." As the crowd erupted into soft applause, someone whispered, "He really waited all this time." No one questioned it. The air felt heavier after it happened, not with sorrow, but with something more ancient, more sacred. A release. As if the mountains themselves had been holding their breath for 4 long winters and finally, with one leap, one bark, one tearful embrace, they exhaled. Tyler Grant remained still, kneeling behind his camera tripod though the recording had long stopped. He didn't need more footage. Nothing he could film now would be more powerful than what had already unfolded. Shadow burying his muzzle into Ethan Williams' chest like a dog possessed by memory, Ethan crumpling around him with tears soaking the fur that had once been a warm pillow during thunderstorms and whispered secrets. Nearby, Carla Williams sat on a folding chair someone had offered her. Her hands were clasped together, trembling with the shock of impossible joy. Her glasses fogged as she watched her grandson cry, not the kind of sorrowful cry that had haunted their home in Texas for years, but the breaking open kind. The kind that finally made room for healing. The crowd around the gas station had gone silent. Some had begun quietly wiping their eyes. Others turned away, giving the boy and his dog the dignity of space. Donnie Clark, the retired park ranger, removed his cap and held it over his heart. B. Richardson, the high school artist, began sketching furiously in the corner of her pad, capturing the outline of the boy curled over the dog in thick charcoal strokes. Laura Jenkins stood behind the cafe table she had set up earlier. Her thermos of coffee steamed in the morning chill, untouched. Her expression was unreadable, her arms folded across her chest, not out of skepticism, but restraint. She was not a woman easily swayed by theatrics. She had lived too long, seen too much. But even she felt the tremble inside, as if watching a story she'd quietly believed in for years find its final chapter. Tyler finally stepped back from his camera. He tucked his notepad into his jacket and moved toward the SUV, giving the family their space. When Carla looked up at him, her face red and streaked, he simply nodded. "You brought him home," she said. "I didn't," Tyler replied. "He never left." A few minutes later, Ethan stood. His face was flushed, his eyes swollen, but his hands were steady. He looked down at Shadow, who now sat obediently at his side, tail tapping the gravel in slow, steady thumps. The leash, once just a symbol, now linked them again, soft, familiar, trusted. "Are you ready to go home?" Ethan whispered. Shadow responded not with a bark, but with a gentle lean against Ethan's leg, the kind of weight a dog gives only to those who belong to them. They led him to the SUV, and this time, Shadow didn't hesitate. He stepped up into the back seat, circled once on the blanket Carla had laid out, then settled with his head resting between the seats, eyes flicking from Ethan to the road ahead. Tyler stepped back to give them room, but found himself unable to leave just yet. As the SUV door shut, he pulled out his phone and began typing. Not a tweet, not a press update, but the first lines of the article he knew would change him forever. For 4 years, a dog waited at the side of a forgotten road. He wasn't lost. He was loyal. And today, he reminded us all what it means to hold on when everyone else has let go. Later that evening, back in his motel room, Tyler wrote feverishly, his fingers barely keeping up with the flood of thoughts. He wrote about the first time he saw Shadow, how the dog didn't move, didn't bark, just stared into the horizon like it owed him something. He wrote about Laura, about the cafe scones, about the townsfolk who left jerky and blankets and whispered prayers to a dog they didn't even know. He wrote about the fireman who remembered Shadow chasing an ambulance, the gas station worker who'd seen paw prints in the snow, the watercolor girl and her trembling hands. But most of all, he wrote about the boy and the moment that broke the dam inside every witness, the moment Shadow recognized Ethan's voice. Midway through the piece, he stopped and stared at the blinking cursor. Something inside him stirred. He had spent the last few years detached from everything, emotion, place, purpose. War had taken pieces of him. Deadlines had drained the rest. But this story had given something back. A kind of faith. He titled the piece simply, "The Dog Who Waited." The following morning, Tyler sent it to 3 national publications. He didn't expect much. But within hours, all 3 replied. They wanted it on the front page. As the story went live across the country, phone calls poured in. Messages from journalists, producers, rescue foundations. But Tyler ignored most of them. He wasn't interested in turning Shadow into a spectacle. He wasn't going to let the most sacred moment he'd ever captured become clickbait. Instead, he went back to the gas station. Just once more. The crowd had dispersed. The chalkboard sign still stood, though the words had begun to fade in the wind. Someone had left a bouquet of yellow daisies beside Pump 3. A child's drawing was pinned next to it, showing a boy and a dog walking side by side under a rainbow. Tyler sat on the curb and watched the spot where Shadow used to sit. Empty now, but full in its own way. He pulled out his phone and tapped a voice memo. "If you're hearing this," he said, "you probably already know the story. But I just want to say, I think we spend too much time trying to move on, to outrun our pain. Sometimes, maybe what we need is to sit still. To wait, like he did. Because when you wait with your whole heart, sometimes something comes back." Then he closed the recording, stood, and walked away. The highway stretched endlessly behind them, but for Shadow, the journey had only just begun. The SUV rumbled steadily south through rolling hills, dusty fields, and small towns that blurred past the windows. Ethan leaned against the back seat door, one hand resting on Shadow's flank, the other lightly gripping the worn red leash coiled in his lap. The dog lay curled next to him, his body pressed close, yet his eyes remained open, alert, tracking every sound and vibration. He had left Asheville, but not yet let go. By the time they crossed into San Antonio, the afternoon sun painted long golden shadows across the suburban sidewalks. Carla Williams parked the SUV in the driveway of their two-story brick home, nestled in a quiet cul-de-sac where the neighbors all waved but rarely lingered. Spring flowers bloomed in uneven rows along the edge of the porch, and a ceramic sign near the welcome mat read, "This house runs on coffee, books, and dog hair." Carla stepped out first, brushing her silver curls behind her ear. She wore a soft blue blouse and a pair of jeans that had faded at the knees, practical but well cared for. Her face held that complex mix of joy and anxiety, like someone carrying a fragile gift across a rope bridge. She opened the back door. "Come on, sweet boy," she said softly. Ethan didn't move at first. He looked at Shadow. "Home," he whispered. Shadow lifted his head slowly. He didn't leap or wag. He simply stepped out of the car with caution, his movements fluid but tense, tail lowered, nose twitching. He followed Ethan up the walkway, pausing at the threshold. The front door was wide open. Carla stood back, giving space. Ethan crouched and whispered, "It's okay. This time, we're going in together." Shadow crossed the threshold. The house held new smells, carpet cleaner, old wood, distant coffee grounds, but underneath it all was them. Ethan. Carla. A faint scent of old socks and peanut butter from a kitchen drawer. He sniffed cautiously, moving through the living room in slow, measured steps. His ears flicked at every creak in the floorboards. Carla had prepared a soft dog bed in the corner near the fireplace, complete with 2 bowls and a basket of toys Ethan had chosen himself. But Shadow didn't go near it. Instead, he lay down near the front door and curled into himself, his eyes fixed on the frame, waiting, not for someone to come in, but perhaps for the idea that he was finally allowed to stay. That night, Shadow refused to enter Ethan's room. When Ethan brought out a blanket and pillow and curled beside him on the floor, Shadow didn't move away, but he also didn't close his eyes until long after the boy had fallen asleep. The next few days followed a quiet rhythm. Shadow ate little, drank only after long stretches of stillness, and often stared at windows as though calculating how to return to the road. Carla took him on gentle walks through the neighborhood each morning before the sun rose too high. She wore wide-brimmed hats and soft cardigans, and always carried a reusable grocery bag with biscuits, waste bags, and a folded copy of Tyler's article, tucked there like a talisman. They walked to Willow Creek Park, a quiet, tree-lined stretch near the elementary school, where joggers passed without notice and retired couples walked hand in hand. Carla would sit on a bench and pat the seat beside her. "Come here, Kung," she'd say, her southern lilt tender and cracked. "You're home now. I know it's different, but home isn't just where you wait. It's where you're wanted." Shadow never sat beside her. He stood near, eyes always drifting toward the path behind them. But Carla kept talking. She told him stories about Ethan's younger days, about how he used to sleep with a flashlight because he was scared of shadows. "And now look," she whispered one morning, "you are the shadow that makes him brave." Ethan kept his promise. Each night he laid down beside the front door, even when his back began to ache and the floor chilled his bones. Carla suggested gently, "Maybe try sleeping in your bed again, sweetheart." But Ethan only shook his head. "Not until he knows this door won't take me away again." By the end of the week, something shifted. It happened quietly. That morning, Ethan awoke to find Shadow wasn't beside the door. Panic jolted him upright, until he saw the shepherd curled on the dog bed in the living room, his head resting on the edge of a blanket Ethan had left there days before. His body was still tense, but his tail gave a slow, singular wag when Ethan entered the room. Later that day, Marcus, Ethan's father, returned from a business trip. Marcus was a tall man with a sun-worn face and crow's feet etched into the corners of his blue eyes. He worked long hours in real estate and rarely smiled, but when he stepped inside and saw the dog he had once given to his son as a birthday gift, something flickered in his expression. "Shadow," he said, kneeling slowly. "You really made it, huh?" Shadow didn't jump or lick, but he didn't flinch either. He walked forward and sat beside Marcus, pressing his shoulder into the man's knee. Carla watched from the kitchen, one hand over her mouth. That night, Ethan returned to his bed. He left the door open. He didn't expect anything. But around midnight, the sound of padded paws crossed the hallway. A weight landed beside the bed. A sigh. Shadow lay down against Ethan's side, resting his head across the boy's legs. And finally, both of them slept. The morning light filtered gently through the blinds, painting quiet stripes across Ethan's bed sheets and the tangled hair resting on his pillow. He stirred faintly, still half asleep, until a warmth against his legs pulled him fully into waking. For a moment he froze, his brain caught between memory and dream. Then he looked down and saw Shadow. The German Shepherd was curled along the edge of the mattress, one paw tucked beneath his chin, breathing slow and even. He was fully asleep, finally, not beside the door, not on the cold floor, but in the bed, pressed against Ethan like he had done all those years ago. His fur was a bit duller now, a little rough along the haunches, but his face held something new, or perhaps something returned, peace. Ethan didn't say anything. He simply placed one hand gently on Shadow's back, feeling the rise and fall of each breath. After a few minutes, Shadow shifted slightly, then, without opening his eyes, lifted his head and placed it on Ethan's lap. The boy smiled, tears welling and spilling over before he could stop them. "You remember," he whispered. That morning, Carla found them still in bed, Ethan reading a dog-eared comic book aloud while Shadow lay curled beside him, content. She said nothing, just smiled, backed out of the room, and pressed her hand over her heart. From the hallway, she could hear Ethan say softly, "This is the part where the hero comes back." Later that day, Shadow's transformation began to show itself more boldly. It started when Marcus returned home from work. The moment he opened the door and called out, "Hey, anyone home?" Shadow padded into the hallway and, unexpectedly, wagged his tail. It was a slow wag, almost uncertain, but it was there. Carla, who had been watering her potted herbs in the kitchen, nearly dropped the watering can. "That's the first tail wag," she breathed. Marcus knelt and held out his hand. "Hey boy." Shadow trotted forward, not with puppy-like enthusiasm, but with trust. Solid. Real. He nudged Marcus's palm with his nose and allowed a firm rub behind the ears. The tension that had sat in his shoulders for so long, visible even in sleep, was gone. That afternoon, Ethan and Carla decided to take Shadow to Roosevelt Park, a wider, livelier area than the quiet trails of Willow Creek. Carla packed a picnic lunch, turkey sandwiches, apple slices, and Shadow's favorite soft treats, and they drove the short distance under a sky just beginning to warm toward summer. Roosevelt Park was busier than usual. Children chased kites near the baseball fields, older couples played chess at shaded tables, and joggers looped around the path. Ethan brought along a tennis ball, though he didn't expect much. Shadow had never shown interest in toys since coming home. But something had shifted. Ethan tossed the ball gently across the grass. Shadow looked up. His ears perked. Then tentatively, then with purpose, he ran. Not away. Not in panic. But toward the ball. He picked it up, brought it back, dropped it at Ethan's feet, and looked up with what could only be described as pride. They did it again. And again. After the fourth throw, Carla wiped her eyes. "Well, I'll be," she murmured. "He's really coming back." While Ethan and Shadow played, a figure stood near the entrance to the park, watching from a polite distance. Tyler Grant, now clean-shaven with a slightly fuller face, wore a navy jacket and jeans. He held no camera, no equipment, just a paper bag with 2 lattes and a cinnamon scone. Ethan spotted him and waved. "Tyler!" Tyler approached, smiling, but stayed on the edge of the scene. "Didn't want to interrupt," he said. "You two look busy." Shadow trotted over, ball in mouth, and paused at Tyler's feet. He dropped the ball and gave a short, contented huff. His eyes were clear, his posture relaxed, tail sweeping side to side like a slow metronome. Tyler knelt. Hey buddy, he said softly. Didn't think I'd see you like this. Shadow pressed his head into Tyler's chest. Ethan grinned. He remembers you. I didn't bring a camera, Tyler said. I know, Ethan replied. You don't need to. Tyler stayed a while, sipping coffee, tossing the ball a few times, laughing when Shadow would ignore his commands but follow Ethan's like gospel. After some time, he stood and looked out over the grass. I've been offered a book deal, he said casually. They want the story. Ethan blinked. Shadow's story? Yours too, Tyler said. But I don't know if I'm going to do it. Why not? Tyler turned to him. Because some stories aren't meant to be owned. They're just meant to be lived. Ethan nodded. Before Tyler left, he handed Ethan a worn leather notebook. I kept notes, he said. About the town. About the people who helped. About all the near misses. I thought maybe someday you'd want to know just how many people cared before they even knew your name. Ethan took the notebook and ran his hand across the cover. Thank you. That night, Shadow slept at the foot of Ethan's bed again. But this time, he didn't wait for the door to open. He didn't keep his ears tuned to the wind or lift his head at every passing car. When Ethan turned off the light and whispered, "Good night, boy," Shadow let out a soft sigh and rested his head between his paws. And in the stillness of that room, under a roof he now accepted as home, Shadow finally dreamed. Not of highways or rain or sirens, but of a boy, and a beginning. There are stories that stay with us not because they're grand, but because they whisper truth in the quietest corners of our hearts. Shadow's journey was not just a tale of a dog waiting. It was a living testament to loyalty, faith, and the unseen hand of God working through time, through strangers, through loss and reunion. For years passed, and yet not a single moment was wasted. Because love never forgets. And when the world walks away, sometimes God sends one creature to wait, so the broken can find their way back to each other. In our daily lives, we rush, we lose hope, we forget. But just like Shadow waited by the roadside, maybe God is waiting for us, in a moment of silence, in a forgotten prayer, in the soft look of someone who simply refuses to give up on you. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a reminder that love is never truly lost, that even after years of silence, miracles can still happen. Leave a comment below. Just type Amen if you believe God still works through the most unexpected messengers. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us on this journey of stories that heal, stories that remind us we're not alone. May God bless you and everyone you love, and may you always have someone waiting, just like Shadow did.